Welcome to 2021. Congrats, we made it. And so we look forward to a new year, a new chance to reinvent ourselves, be better people, and shake the newly formed bad habits we've all accumulated over the lockdown. Sad to say, my own bad habit isn't newly formed at all, it's actually a relapse. That's right, dear viewer. These past months in isolation have led me to fall back into the same endless maw I've managed to escape on several past occasions. World of Warcraft. So I figured the first step would be the same one any good student would do when faced with a crisis of productivity. Turn it into a research problem, of course. I thought maybe I could kill two birds with one spinning crane kick by exploring this game that's very near and dear to me through the lens of criticism. Lucky for all of you, I have here just the right man to enlighten us with some postmodern insight on why World of Warcraft is so damn addicting. It's Jean Baudrillard, High Priest of Postmodernism. Of course, this in-game version of him I've created is but an image, a duplicate, a simulation. And that's actually what his theory is all about. He believed that to live in the postmodern world of today is to live in a simulation. But not a computer-mediated simulation founded on ones and zeros that films like The Matrix would have you believe. No. He believed that in the same way that every experience in a computer simulation is a meticulously detailed imitation which, at the point of immersion, renders the reality outside it irrelevant, every experience in the world today is but a copy of a copy of a copy of an original sign that is no longer there. In the copy's deliberate attempt to be the original, it becomes more real than real. It becomes what he calls hyperreal, and in doing so, diminishes the original. According to Baudrillard, this hyperreal simulation, which has become our lived experience today, is the most advanced form of what he calls simulacra. But simulation didn't always exist in the way we see it manifest today. In his book, Symbolic Exchange and Death, Baudrillard proposes the so-called orders of simulacra, featuring two other types of simulacra that rose to prominence throughout history, before developing into the third and highest order. The first order simulacra is that of the imitation, or counterfeit, which rose to prominence in the Renaissance. An imitation is noticeably very similar to the original, but doesn't make the original sign any less real. In fact, by being a clear replica, it reinforces the fact that the original sign is the original. It came first, after all. Now, if you've played World of Warcraft before, there's a slim chance that the word simulacra rings a bell. In the game, Death Knight characters have access to this ability called Dark Simulacrum. Dark Simulacrum allows the Death Knight to unleash an exact duplicate of an enemy spell cast for a short amount of time. Now, this ability is really cool and can be used to great effect in certain situations, but casting a simulacrum of a spell is not as reliable or powerful or consistent as having access to that spell on demand. A warlock casting a fear spell is going to be better than a Death Knight casting a simulacrum of it, because it doesn't require as much effort to set up. The simulacrum has to be based on an original instance of the spell it's duplicating, so that needs to happen first of all. And if the spell is dodged, dispelled, or Death Knight is unable to cast it before the simulacrum wears off, it's lost. A warlock, on the other hand, can simply cast it again. When used right, there are some really impressive plays and powerful uses of Dark Simulacrum, but it's no replacement for an actual spell. A First Order Simulacrum is exactly like that. Very similar to the original, situationally valuable, but not on the same level as the sign it imitates. The second order of simulacra is that of the product, which rose to prominence in the Industrial Revolution. Unlike the imitation, the product can stand on its own. The product is still, in some way, a copy of the original sign. However, unlike the imitation, these two are on the same level of value. I want to go back to a school context to illustrate this one. My dad went to the same university I'm currently attending, and he's told me many a horror story of camping on campus at 4 a.m. to line up early and enroll in a class before it runs out of slots. My generation doesn't have to deal with those kinds of problems anymore because of our computerized registration system. It's a lot like the group finder tool in WoW. You sign up for as many groups as you can and hope to get in one that works for you. There's even a priority system where if you're a freshman or graduating, it's like playing a tank or a healer and you have a better chance at securing a slot. However, instead of other players deciding who gets in where, it's a machine, a product. Obviously, this is a huge step forward and it solves a lot of problems with the in-person registration system. The reason why this is merely a second-order simulacra and not a hyperreal simulation of the enrollment process is because there are instances when simple human intervention, a reactivation of the original, you might say, trumps it. For example, a graduating student who absolutely needs to take a particular class in order to graduate on time can get locked out of it if the same class is a popular elective for students of other degree programs. The computer doesn't understand the urgency or the desperation felt by the graduating student and is incapable of extending compassion to them. In-person registration staff, however, can, and intervention can be made for this exceptional case. Like the counterfeit, the product is a copy, but it is an extremely efficient copy. This efficiency makes it very valuable in its own right, but not to the point of rendering the original obsolete. Both serve their purpose. So now I kind of want to tie the threads of Baudrillard's theory that I've unfurled together to address my wow problem. If we consider pre-COVID face-to-face class in a classroom as the quote-unquote original reality of being a college student, then the ever-emerging forms of online learning can be considered simulacra. Let's consider for a moment a few improved features of remote learning that make it a simulacra. For one thing, online classes are not as constrained by space, and space is the big problem in this pandemic. We all have to be far, far apart from each other, preferably with walls in between, and that's just not possible in the conventional classroom. Holding classes online allows us to do so from the safety of our homes. Online classes are also not as constrained by time. You no longer need to wake up hours in advance to allot time for your commute to school. It's entirely possible to wake up at 8:25 a.m., get ready for class in 5 minutes, and report in right on time with no consequences. In the same way, you don't have to sit through traffic for an hour or two making your way back home after class. In theory, having class online should save us a lot of time. Now, there's 1,000 other directions I can take this argument, but I'll leave it at those two for now. That in mind, I hypothesize that the current system of purely remote learning, as it has been implemented in my university right now, is merely a first-order simulacrum. You can probably make a strong case for it being a second-order simulacrum, and when it's done right, I'm absolutely sure it can be. I just don't think the conditions needed to achieve that have been met. I don't believe my experience of college online for one semester has been a product of equal value to the same amount of time spent on campus. It's just been an insufficient imitation. The main reason why I find remote learning to be lacking is that it's unable to capture the experience of being fully engaged in learning as it was in the original. This is, in a way, interrelated with the benefits a remote setup provides. This is the cost of trying to proceed as we did before when everything's changed. We've gained the ability to keep chugging on, but we've lost so much to get here. We no longer have to gather together in a classroom, nor take the time to drive or commute all the way there, but as a result, we're no longer immersed in the activity of going to school. Spending time and traversing space no longer limits the classroom in online learning. But as a result, it's no longer walled off from everything else outside it. We no longer have the sense of being on campus, in a classroom, a room that was made for learning. Instead, we're just at home, in the bedroom, with a million distractions around and a million more on the device you're accessing lessons on. We no longer have the feeling of being fully engaged by a class, such that nothing outside the classroom can invade our focus. The classroom is no longer separate from the rest of our life. It's no longer separate from our home. And that's what makes it so difficult to feel engaged. And this is where World of Warcraft comes in. Whereas our online learning platforms are mere counterfeits of the classroom, video games like World of Warcraft are hyperreal simulations of it. An online class can't suck you into a world of new ideas and lessons all within a computer screen the way an online video game can. A video game is actually an extremely conducive environment for learning. It's just that you're not learning history or philosophy or math. You're learning how to play the game, how to push the right buttons at the right time, the fastest way to get from point A to point B without engaging any enemies in combat. You're learning the story of the game, the history of its characters. You're learning about the universe around you and how things work here. Like a classroom, this experience is challenging. The consequences for not learning enough to be at the same skill level as the rest of your party are real. But the satisfaction of playing the game well and improving your skill level over time is just as real. There's real challenge, real rewards, and a real process of learning in between the two. Just by taking one look at all the guides, tutorials, and fan-made databases available online, you can tell that it takes a whole lot of learning to be great at this game. MMORPGs like WoW are able to fully immerse players in a simulated world by design. When I connect to a synchronous lecture from my bedroom, I'm doing so in my bedroom. But when I log into WoW, what happens outside of Azeroth is of no concern to me for the next 2 or so hours of playtime. That's what makes the Hyperreal both beautiful and bizarre. Not only is it able to capture the sense of immersion that an online class fails to, it does so better than the original experience of being in a classroom. It does so without actually needing the 4 walls, a door, a projector, and a whiteboard. It does so only with knowledge that is bound to the game world, so far removed from the reality outside it. And for the millions of players around the world, many of which are students like me, that makes it more real than the real classroom. Our goals, relationships, and obligations in the game begin to feel more important than those outside it. And that's the danger of the Hyperreal. In his book Simulacra and Simulation, which was published a few years after Symbolic Exchange and Death, Baudrillard expounds on the idea of simulacra and how the world around us now is nothing but hyperreal. Within our hyperreality there exists other simulacra, some of which can reach the level of hyperreal as well. Such simulacra conceal the fact that everything outside it is simulacra as well. He uses the example of Disneyland, which is so obviously imaginary, so blatantly smoke and mirrors that it leads people to forget that the world outside it is just as much a hyperreality. He likens this to the example of prisons, which conceal the fact that society around it as a whole has become more and more like a prison.
This world is a prison.
So as a closing thought, I want to apply the same logic to the classroom simulation of World of Warcraft. I chose this fantasy MMORPG as my example for this video over any other video game because of how closely I felt it resembled my experience in school. Hardcore WoW players are all about the numbers. Once they reach the highest level, they start chasing the highest item level. And once they reach a high item level, they start chasing the highest damage per second logs. Once they top the logs, they start chasing rankings, high scores, speedruns. It's a never-ending grind to be the best player there is. Perhaps all of this serves to conceal the fact that in the real classroom, learning in the postmodern world has become all about chasing numbers. To us students, it's about chasing the highest possible grade to get a good job after graduating, which is not too far off from a hardcore raider farming the rarest items with the best stats to stay in their competitive raiding guild. To administrators, it's all about chasing the world university rankings, which is in turn based on our outputs, which are quantified by the numbers that we chase. It's so easy to dismiss WoW as an arbitrary grind to get the highest possible numbers in the shortest amount of time, but really, is the neoliberal education system of today so far off from that? So, my dear viewers, I leave you with this. Is the problem really the fact that our digital classrooms are but counterfeits? Or is there something profoundly wrong with the original system it imitates?